Hello to our viewers tuning in. You're watching Weekly News Highlights, where we bring you some of the biggest stories that made the headlines this week. I'm Song Yoo-jin here in Arirang's virtual studio. It was a busy week for President Yoon Suk Yeol. The South Korean leader hosted a trilateral summit with Japan and China on Monday, the first in over 4 years. Then on Wednesday, he held a bilateral summit with the President of the United Arab Emirates, marking the first state visit to Seoul by a UAE president. Moving on, tensions escalated on the Korean Peninsula throughout the week. It began with North Korea's failed attempt to launch its second spy satellite. Hours later, the regime sent balloons filled with waste across the inter-Korean border. Then on Thursday, it launched short-range ballistic missiles towards the East Sea. We'll analyze what's behind these provocations. Finally, another unwanted milestone in Korea's demographic crisis. The country's total fertility rate for the first quarter of this year hit a record low for any first quarter, dropping to the 0.7 range for the first time. President Yoon Suk Yeol held back-to-back diplomatic engagements this week in Seoul. And among them, a top-level summit between South Korea, Japan, and China for the first time in 4.5 years amid global and regional tensions. Yoon also held a bilateral summit with the first-ever visit of a leader of the United Arab Emirates to South Korea. For our weekly focus this week, we discuss and delve into the significance of these meetings with our presidential office correspondent, Oh Soo-young, who's in the studio. Welcome, Soo-young.
Hi, Yoo-jin.
Lovely to have you. So my first question is, let's begin with how this trilateral summit actually came about amid difficult conditions.
Sure, Yoo-jin. So as you said, the ninth trilateral meeting between South Korea, Japan and China, now that was the first since December 2019. If you remember, in the early months of 2020, we saw the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic becoming global, really, and that made it difficult for these in-person gatherings to happen. Also, in the past 4 years, relations between all three countries deteriorated. Among the many contentious points are Japan and China's regional rivalry and their territorial rift over the Senkaku and Diaoyu Islands, of course. Korea and Japan have their own territorial dispute over the Dokdo Islet, as well as wartime issues, including the compensation of Korean victims of Japan's forced labor. Now, this issue was what prompted Tokyo to instigate a bilateral trade war in 2019. On top of all of that, China's rivalry with the United States has made it hostile towards Korea and Japan as they align more closely with Washington in terms of regional security. Finally, last year, President Yoon Suk Yeol made painstaking efforts to restore bilateral ties with Japan, which led to all trade and security relations being normalized and their trilateral cooperation with Washington to deter North Korea being taken to new heights at Camp David. Since then, Yoon has been reaching out to Tokyo and Beijing to resume the leaders' summit between the three countries. So it's taken almost a year of Seoul's active efforts to bring its neighbours to the table, with China probably needing the most convincing. It seems all three countries at this point felt the need to lower tensions at a particularly sensitive time in regional affairs.
So when U.S.-China relations are not likely to improve dramatically, maybe in the foreseeable future, I think any form of improvement in China, South Korea, and China-Japan relations is, of course, what Beijing would like to see. So, but anyway, I guess this is precisely why the Chinese side appeared, extremely concerned when Japan and South Korea actually raised their voice on the Taiwan and South China Sea issue, and everything just put together, it seems to indicate that the current situation is no longer a simple, diplomatic disagreement. It could be a very dangerous trend that Beijing finds, hard to accept. Like, will Tokyo and Seoul go maybe even deeper into cooperating with Washington? It's rather confrontational strategy against China. And so, on what circumstances, at least the pause button can be pressed.
So sensitive security issues were likely to have been avoided, but the meeting was significant in the very fact that it happened, as all three countries face the same kind of geopolitical uncertainties, trade uncertainties, not to mention the risk of pandemics and also their demographic challenges that they're facing, health issues, etc. So they're all on the same ship here.
I see. So will the agreements that were made actually help them overcome these tensions?
Well, yes, it seems that the points there in the declaration, they are very significant in that they've been really designed to continue dialogue between the three countries. So we see agreements on people-to-people exchanges. Now, that doesn't usually receive much attention in these kind of joint statements, but this time they were more or less the centerpiece, especially given how the tension between these countries fueled some animosity among their citizens as well. Also, cooperation on climate change, pandemic response, public welfare and health for their aging populations. These are perhaps lower key, but significant areas that can continue regardless of political tensions. Another key area was their commitment to resuming FTA negotiations and cooperating on supply chains. This was significant amid Washington's push to de-risk production and supply chains away from the Chinese market.
And I think it did show that all three of these countries do want to maintain contact, that even though they may have political differences and they may begin to belong to different economic blocs, they do need each other, at least for now, and they're willing to keep the channels open. So we've seen things like commitment to free trade. We've seen further movement on FTAs. We've seen Chinese efforts to increase direct investment into China to provide more jobs. They're having a very serious economic slowdown in China, so this will be one way of not only creating jobs, but also getting technology that they sorely need. And then the big question was, what were they going to do about supply chains? And they've at least kept the channels open to communicate with each other about supply chains, especially things like rare earth that China is capable of putting export controls on.
Together, the three Northeast Asian neighbours account for 25% of the global gross domestic product. So amid their differences, it's in the common interest of the three countries to collaborate, given their proximity and interdependence. So in this time of tension, it really is crucial to keep dialogue channels open and try to avoid misunderstandings.
Right, but South Korea and Japan did bring up North Korea's nuclear threats in a joint declaration and at a press conference, which you also attended, right?
Yes, it indeed was quite a tense morning because Japan had, in fact, been informed by North Korea that the regime would be launching a military satellite as early as the same day. President Yoon called it a clear violation of Security Council resolutions and said that the international community must respond sternly. The Japanese PM also strongly urged that North Korea cease the launch. However, the Chinese premier merely said that all parties involved must maintain restraint and prevent the situation from getting worse. Now, these different stances at the press conference were also clear in the joint declaration. All three sides agreed to make positive efforts towards a political solution for a stable Korean Peninsula as a common interest and responsibility. But they merely reiterated their positions when it came to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the issue of adoptees. Now, South Korea and Japan have been pushing for the denuclearization of North Korea in particular, and the release of their nationals held hostage by Pyongyang. But China, avoiding confrontation with the North, usually doesn't call for the denuclearization of North Korea, but of the peninsula, nor does it comment on human rights abuses in the North. During the two separate meetings with Chinese Premier Li Qiang on Monday, President Yoon requested China to play a constructive role regarding North Korea, as well as its weapons exchanges with Russia, emphasizing Beijing's duty to uphold the global nuclear non-proliferation system as a permanent member of the UN Security Council.
Right, so let's now move on to the UAE president's two-day visit to Seoul, which 19 major deals and documents were signed.
That's right. It was a very impressive follow-up to President Yoon's state visit to Abu Dhabi just 1 year and 4 months ago. The two leaders agreed to advance their special strategic partnership in areas like the economy and investment, energy, nuclear energy and defense. And During this week's summit, they added artificial intelligence on top of that. As the backbone of these collaborations, the two sides signed a Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, which is South Korea's first FTA with a Middle Eastern country.
What's really significant is that they're going to reduce tariffs on our main products, including defense, energy, medical, etc. So what's really significant is they're opening up 90% of their medical market to Korea, and we'll be able to discuss exporting our energy, technology, and plant constructions, and also significant development in nuclear and defense, I think, is the key of this agreement.
They also agreed to work together on climate action, joint business ventures, including in the African market in areas like energy and infrastructure.
Right, and beyond these agreements, the friendship between the two countries was also something to highlight, right?
Yes, very much so. This was the first time that a UAE president visited South Korea, marking a new milestone in their friendship, the friendship between these two countries. So the welcome for President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan was the biggest yet by the Yoon administration, beginning with the UAE's leaders' entry into Korean airspace, where 4 Air Force F-15K fighter jets escorted this plane. On Tuesday, there was also a chromatic demonstration by the Korean Air Force's Black Eagles aerobatic team, which flew across the sky several times, leaving smoke trails in the colours of the South Korean and UAE flags. The UAE is South Korea's only special strategic partner in the Middle East, and the outcomes we saw from their summit were a testament to that kind of trust and friendship built between the two sides.
Well, I think it was definitely a busy week of diplomacy for President Yoon, to be followed by even more as he hosts more than 40 African countries at the first ever Korea-Africa Summit next week. All right, Soo-young, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Right, always great to be here, Yoo-jin. Thanks.
Now, shifting focus, a bizarre provocation from North Korea this week. The regime flew more than 200 balloons filled with trash and waste across the inter-Korean border on Tuesday night. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung tells us what could have tempted the North to do so and why it's significant.
North Korea has sent its largest ever number of balloons carrying trash and excrement across the border to the south. As of 4 p.m. Wednesday, the South Korean military found over 260 balloons presumed to be sent by North Korea. Attached to the balloons were bags filled with excrement and trash. The balloons were first discovered on Tuesday night and were shortly found across the country, including in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, Gangwon-do, and Gyeongsang-do provinces. The Joint Chiefs of Staff strongly condemned North Korea's actions.
These actions by North Korea clearly violate international law and pose serious threats to the safety of South Korean citizens. All responsibility arising from the North Korean balloons lies entirely with North Korea, and we sternly warn North Korea to immediately stop its inhumane and low-grade actions.
The military added that it is working closely with relevant agencies, including the Ministry of the Interior and Safety, the United Nations Command, and the police, to secure the public's safety. An expert said that measures should be implemented to prevent this from escalating into a military conflict.
If this situation escalates further, it could lead to a military conflict. The Korean government needs to manage the situation better now than ever before. I believe it would be necessary for the United Nations Command, which manages the armistice agreement, to intervene appropriately as well.
The balloons also pose a threat to citizens near the inter-Korean border.
There are considerable concerns regarding the safety of residents in the border area, so I think efforts must be made between North and South Korea to quickly resolve this issue.
On Sunday, North Korea warned of such retaliatory action against the distribution of anti-Pyongyang leaflets in border areas sent by North Korean defectors and conservative activists in South Korea. North Korea previously sent balloons carrying waste in 2016, damaging vehicles and houses. Choi Min-jung, Arirang.News.
And 2 days after sending these balloons, the sister of the North's leader Kim Yo-jong described them as, quote, sincere gifts, while the regime resumed its provocations, launching a barrage of missiles. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil walks us through these developments.
North Korea launched around 10 short-range ballistic missiles on Thursday morning toward the East Sea. Firing this many missiles is almost unprecedented, according to experts, with the possible aim being to make up for the regime's failed military spy satellite launch attempt Monday night. The missiles were detected at around 6 a.m. by South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff and are estimated to have traveled around 350 kilometers.
Regarding the launch of ballistic missiles by North Korea today, we conclude that it, as well as the sending balloons carrying waste that were sent into the south, are an effort to deflect away from the failed attempt to launch a spy satellite into orbit on Monday.
The military added it immediately locked onto and tracked the missiles, sharing the related information with the US and Japan. This missile provocation follows the hundreds of balloons reportedly carrying fecal matter and waste that the regime sent across the border into the south from around Tuesday night. The North Korean leader's sister, Kim Yo-jong, called the balloons sincere gifts to South Korea and said they were sent under the regime's freedom of expression. In response to Kim's comments, South Korea's Ministry of Unification released a statement on Thursday. It said that freedom of expression for the regime's people is severely restricted and it cannot be used along the same lines as in the South, referring to South Korean private organizations sending money and medicine to the North along with leaflets. The ministry added the North should realize that there are more urgent tasks to ensure its people have free access to outside information and the right to decide for themselves instead of continuing to violate UN Security Council resolutions by launching satellite and ballistic missiles. 김정실, 아리랑뉴스.
And staying with North Korea, the regime's provocations followed a failed attempt to launch a second spy satellite into space earlier this week. The Korean military said it would investigate Russia's assistance in the satellite's development, as this could strengthen ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. Let's once again turn to our Choi Min-jung.
A suspected military reconnaissance satellite launched by North Korea explodes mid-air. The video released by the South Korean military captured North Korea's attempt to put what would have been its second spy satellite into orbit. But as shown in the footage, the launch was a failure. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the launch fired over the West Sea at about 10:44 p.m. on Monday night. But 2 minutes after the launch, it exploded above North Korean waters. The regime was quick to admit that its attempt had failed, with initial analysis showing the failure in the first stage of flight was due to a newly developed liquid fuel rocket motor. South Korea's military also cautiously assumed that the failure was due to problems with the rocket's engine. However, the JCS said more analysis is needed as the rocket exploded very early in its flight. The military said it must look into whether Russia was involved in the satellite program by not only providing technological guidance, but also potentially by providing equipment. An expert said Monday's failure is bound to bring Pyongyang and Moscow closer together.
Russia's pride has probably been hurt by this failure, and from that perspective, Russia is likely to actively cooperate with North Korea concerning the rocket engine in the future.
Experts say North Korea's plan to launch 3 spy satellites this year is now less likely, as it would take at least 3 to 6 months to solve issues discovered from Monday's launch. North Korea is also expected to stage provocations on the Korean Peninsula to make up for its launch failure. Choi Min-jung, Arirang.News.
Now, though it failed, Tuesday's satellite launch was slammed by South Korea, the United States, and Japan. Choi Soo-hyung has the details.
South Korea and the United States have both heavily criticized North Korea's attempt to put another spy satellite into orbit. During a meeting led by the director of the National Security Office, Chang Ho-jin, on Monday night, the launch was condemned as a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, regardless of whether it failed or not. During the meeting, attendees also called the launch an act of provocation that threatened peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, and the international community. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command said in a statement on Monday local time that it condemns the launch as a clear violation of several UN Security Council resolutions. The statement also said that the launch involved technologies directly related to North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile program and that the U.S.'s defense commitments to South Korea and Japan remain ironclad. Meanwhile, Japan's defense minister Minoru Kihara called the launch a serious challenge to the entire world. Also, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated on Tuesday that an early morning phone call the nuclear envoys from Seoul, Washington and Tokyo had condemned the North launch and discussed ways to cooperate. Hyung, 아리랑뉴스.
Now, in other news, Korea took a significant step forward in space exploration on Monday with the launch of the Korea Aerospace Administration, often referred to as the Korean version of NASA. At Thursday's opening ceremony, President Yoon Suk Yeol celebrated South Korea's next step towards becoming one of the world's top 5 space powers. And during the first National Space Committee meeting the same day, President Yoon said that the Korea Aerospace Administration will usher in a new space era, with some of its main missions being to land a domestic probe on the moon by 2032 and plant the national flag on Mars by 2045. Now, by expanding the relevant budget to more than 1.5 trillion Korean won, or just over $1 billion by 2027, he pledged to foster the country's space program and nurture domestic aerospace companies. The inauguration day of KASA, May 27th, will also be designated as a national commemorative day called Aerospace Day. Now, turning to the economy, despite already having the world's lowest fertility rate, which is the average number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, Korea saw this figure hit a new low in the first quarter. Our An Sung-jin delves into the reasons behind this decline and examines whether it is likely to continue.
The total fertility rate in South Korea dropped to the lowest first quarter figure on record this year. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the figure, which measures the average number of children born to a woman over her lifetime, continued its downward trend and fell to 0.76 in the first quarter. The first time it has fallen into the 0.7 range for Q1.
Normally, the figure is highest in the first quarter, which suggests that for this year, the overall birth rate might be lower than last year. A change in policies and social conditions will be needed for a rebound.
For the number of newborns in South Korea, the figure fell to its lowest for the month of March compared to the year before. Despite a slight rebound from February, the figure fell by 7.3% on-year, reaching nearly 19,700. However, the expert mentions that the second quarter might be different.
Although there is a decline up to March, the figures for the second quarter might be different as the on-year figure goes up in April. If we do see a rebound for this month as well, it may be attributed to the change in government policies last summer and an increase in the number of marriages.
The number of babies born fell on-year in all of the 17 administrative divisions in the country except for Sejong City, which saw an increase of 20 additional newborns. An official from Statistics Korea said that with relatively younger couples concentrated in Sejong City, despite the overall birth rate plunging, this area saw a slight increase. Meanwhile, the number of deaths rose by 7.6% to 31,000. The death rate went up in all regions across the country. The same official noted that the aging population takes up most of the deaths and added that with 2022 seeing a high death rate, the climb for this year is attributed to a base effect of a relatively low figure last year. The final figures are to be announced in August next year once unreported data is accounted for. An Sung-jin, 아리랑뉴스.
And when considering the death rate, South Korea's demographic situation becomes even more alarming. According to Statistics Korea's population estimates 2022 to 2052 released on Tuesday, from 2045 onwards, all 17 administrative divisions in the country are expected to record more deaths than births. Currently, 16 out of 17 divisions, except for Sejong City, are already experiencing this natural population decline. Sejong was the only division with a natural population increase as of 2022. However, it's estimated that while the number of newborns in Sejong will remain at around 3,000 to 4,000 per year until 2052, annual deaths will increase from 2,000 to 5,000. The report forecasts Korea's population to decline to 46.2 million by 2052, a drop of almost 5 million from 2022. And that is if the birth rate, life expectancy, and international migration remain moderate. In the worst-case scenario, the population could shrink to as low as 42.2 million. Over in the U.S., Wall Street experienced a mixed day of trading on Tuesday. American tech giant NVIDIA posted a new record for the Nasdaq, while other shares tumbled. Moon Hae-ryun breaks down the numbers.
The tech-heavy Nasdaq hit a new record high on Wall Street on the back of NVIDIA gains on Tuesday. artificial intelligence chipmaker NVIDIA stocks jumped 7% to reach new heights, boosting the Nasdaq above 17,000 for the first time in history as it closed at 17,019.88. This follows the firm's posting of its quarterly earnings last week, where it reported a fivefold jump in revenue in the first quarter of the year for its data center sales, including AI chips used by companies such as Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI. NVIDIA's share price also skyrocketed with the firm's forecast that second quarter profits are set to be above Wall Street expectations. The firm's shares have more than doubled in value so far this year, and further progress is expected with the release of its next new chip architecture model, Blackwell, later this year. Elsewhere on Wall Street, there were more disappointing results as the yield on the US 10-year Treasury showed a slight rise. Higher yields can have a negative impact on stocks as they tighten financial conditions and push investors towards bonds as a safer asset. The S&P 500 index barely rose by 1.32 points, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended trading at 38,852.86, down over 0.5% from the previous trading day. The anticipation of interest rate cuts by the U.S. Central Bank has led Wall Street to hit new records recently, with the next Federal Open Market Committee meeting to come in just over 2 weeks. As investors await the announcement of U.S. inflation data for April later this week, eyes are on how it could affect the Fed's next move for the benchmark interest rate. 문혜련, 아리랑뉴스.
Finally, on the entertainment front, K-pop girl group Blackpink's music video for their song "뚜두뚜두" surpassed 2.2 billion views on YouTube on Monday, becoming the first video by a K-pop artist to reach that number. The song was released in 2018 and reached number 55 on the Billboard Hot 100. The video then became the most watched worldwide for a K-pop artist that year. The song has been streamed 700 million times on the global music platform Spotify. And that's weekly news highlights for the last week of May. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time and hope you have a great rest of the weekend.